Adon. Okay, naka. Nimbula Vinaka. Siamo talemay na veitalanoa ke Dr. Robert Nicole, nakavalev sara na rongoda na kadibol malumu, muli siamo talemay ni Pua. Naka. So there's quite a few people already waiting. Nakavalevu. Our folks from Japan, Vinaka Mastale, friends from the United States, Vinaka, from Australia and New Zealand, Vinaka vakalevu. Yeah. Vinaka Suliasi na Ulivo, Cell Hall, Vinaka. Vinaka Leri, Losena. Aboleka. Nakavalevu na siya mamay. Tiko sono nominitaro ni dei bakota mai Vinaka. Naka Elangiva, the Vinaka, Marietta Dringamoto. Oh, watching from North Shore, Dr. Robert, North Shore, Auckland. I know you were in Auckland recently, eh? Yes. Naka, Bula Tiko Taupa. Bula Sakivitongavi, saying hello from Central Coast in Sydney. So we're thinking of our friends in Sydney right now with the rain. There's a lot of rain right now in Sydney. So our thoughts go to all our Fijian families in Australia, particularly in the state of New South Wales and the big city of Sydney with a huge, I think, flooding, which is being predicted, I think, in the next couple of hours. So we're thinking of all of you right now. But now I think the moment we've been waiting for, we have been mentioning your name, Dr. Robert, to our listeners from the last couple of months, saying, I'm waiting, I will ask him, I will request him. And when you said yes, I was very happy. So on behalf of all our listeners that are connecting in today, Dr. Robert, we are very, very grateful and very honored to have you join us on this platform. As I've mentioned to you, we're coming close to a year now, next month, where I was just using the social media platform just to talanoa to children and share some of the archaeological research we've been doing in Fiji, the Sigatoka sand dunes and the work in Niassawa, Lau, in all the provinces in Fiji, and just kind of sharing with the young ones. And I have to say that we have to thank COVID-19. There's always a silver lining, as they say, in things that happen to us in our life that may be negative, but sometimes the positive things come out of it. So the Talanoa with Dr. T platform was born nearly a year ago. So the platform is really to invite, amazing researchers and writers and professors like yourself to come and share with our audience, especially our Itoke families all over the world and in Fiji too, about the importance of their tukutuku makawa, their history and things like that. So, so to kickstart our Talanoa today, if you would be able to just to introduce yourself to us, just your upbringing, if you can, your vuvale, the schools that you went to, if you can. I'm sure you might have some of your classmates connecting in as well on this platform. So on our behalf, Bula Vinaka, Dr. Robert Nicole.
Vinaka, Dr. Clarisi, it's a great honor for me to join you and your community of people all over the world who are so keen to advance their knowledge and understanding of Fijian culture and history. So I'm truly honored. I feel that I don't deserve any of the good things that you mentioned about me, but yes, I'm very happy to be here this evening. I myself I was born in Switzerland, which is a small landlocked country in the middle of Europe. Many people in Switzerland, when I was a child, had not seen the sea. And so when my parents decided to move to French Polynesia in the mid 1970s, for us it was a radical transformation from the world that we knew. I was just 10 years old when we left Switzerland, and we lived in French Polynesia for 3 years. And then my dad, who was a minister of the church and became a theologian, taught theology in Papiete. And we experienced life in the islands when there was in certain places where there was no electricity, no phones, no roads, etc., because the church felt that my father needed to learn te reo maohi as quickly as possible so that he could engage with Maohi people in their own language. So that was kind of my introduction to life in the islands, and really it was an amazing experience for us, and my parents still talk about it now, even though they've been resettled in Switzerland for a long time, that the Pacific really changed their lives. And some of us didn't go back to Switzerland. We kind of stayed on. And I'm one of the 5 sons. There are 5 sons who stayed on. Anyway, from French Polynesia, my dad was invited to come and teach at the Pacific Theological College in Suva. And so that became our home for the next 12 years. So I've been living in Fiji with a brief interruption since 1978. So I went to school just across the road from BTC to Suva Grammar School. My entire teenage years were spent in Veivuke. I met my future wife at Suva Grammar. Her name is Racheli, and she's from Choma, the village of Choma in Nadeva in Kandavu. And so we have 2 sons. Our older one has a Tahitian name, Te Anuanua, which is the same name as that my wife had. Her maiden name is Rondolangi, so we thought, oh, that's very nice. It means rainbow as well. in Tahitian. So Te Anuanua, and our second son is Amanaki, and he's named after a very prominent Tongan church leader who was the principal of the Pacific Theological College when Racheli and I were first dating. And then from after secondary school, after Super Grammar, I studied at USP. I did a degree there, and then pretty much started teaching at USP afterwards. And I recall a young woman being in my foundation class by the name of Tarisi Busoni Wailala. And I must say, I am extremely proud that you are now Dr. Tarisi Wulindilo, and that you are teaching at UH. So it's brilliant. So yeah, so that's a bit of my pathway in terms of my personal upbringing. So I'm a person that is not absolutely certain about where home is. I was born in Switzerland, a small mountain village, but grew up in Fiji, and I have a son who lives in New Zealand, and New Zealand was home to us for a brief period of time. So, but yeah, whenever I land in Nadi, when I've been overseas, I feel like I've come back to a very significant part of my life, and a place that I connect with in a very deep way.
So, Vinaka vakalevu. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing about your family. And it's just really nice to see that connection. Yes, and I remembered you at the foundation years of my life at the USP, and it was really nice to have you as my lecturer as well. So it's really wonderful to have that connection over so many years, and now we are talking and sharing as well on this platform, Vinaka vakalevu. So my next question that I was going to ask you is on to your postgraduate or graduate studies in terms of your master's, and then also particularly to your PhD research, which actually led to your book, Disturbed History.
Disturbing History, yes.
Yeah, Disturbing History. So would you like to share a little bit about your pathway into your master's research? Why did you choose the topic you did for your MA, and also how it led to your PhD research, Dr. Robert?
Yeah, so when I did my degree at USP, it was a time when there was a great deal of activism around militarism in the Pacific, the nuclear testing, but also there was a lot of advocacy for independence in those countries that were not yet independent. And I became really kind of sensitive and interested in the workings of colonialism, and in the struggles of people to liberate themselves from colonialism. And because I had been living in French Polynesia as a young kid, and because my parents were both actively involved in this in this kind of these anti-colonial, anti-military, anti-nuclear movements, when I graduated, I decided to try and see if I could use the knowledge that I had gained from my courses in politics, in history, and in literature to explore how colonialism was working, how French colonialism, the subtle ways in which colonialism was working in French Polynesia, and to try and get the English-speaking part of the Pacific interested in what was going on in the French territories. And at that time, I remember that there was a Palestinian intellectual, Edward Said, who had just published a very influential book called Orientalism, in which he analyzed the way in which the West, Europeans, represented non-Western peoples. He was particularly interested in the way that Europeans from the time of Napoleon, so 1800s onwards, were representing the Middle East, Palestinians and other Arabs, and then further east, how they were representing Indians and other Orientals further afield. And I thought it might be an interesting exercise to do something similar and to extend his ideas about Orientalism and see how the French had represented Tahiti and Tahitians and Maohinui and other Maohi people. And so I did, in some ways, an archaeology of how the French had represented Tahiti and its people and the archipelago. And I also wanted to see how people in Maohinui, French Polynesia, had responded to these representations of themselves from outside, how they were proposing counter representations of themselves, Maohi representations of themselves in their own literature. So that was my master's, and I suppose it was there, and then I got really consumed by a very heavy teaching load, and people said, "Oh, you need to do your PhD," and I thought to myself, "Oh no, I've just finished a master's. Let me breathe. Let me focus on my students." And then I went into the PhD when an opening occurred in the early 2000s. And then I went to the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and I did this PhD, the one that you mentioned. And if you want me, I can go into the reason why I got into it. Yeah?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So one of the key reasons was, again, my interest in colonialism and how colonized people respond to attempts by colonial powers to impose their authority over them. And at Super Grammar, we were learning from a book called Fiji in the Pacific. And the impression that I had when I came out of high school in Form 7 was generally that Fiji had been a kind of model of good colonial administration, that the British had done a wonderful job, and that the veivuke were kind of a model race, as it was called, and that basically British benevolence and veivuke obedience had created a kind of a perfect colonial world. And through my studies at USP, I became a bit skeptical of that notion of history. And I thought, I'll just investigate it and see what I find. And I remember one of my first discussions with one of my supervisors in Christchurch. He said to me, "No, Robert, I don't think you'll find much resistance in your research, and being stubborn, I thought, I'll just investigate it all the same. And I thought to myself, you know, if I investigate the whole of the colonial period, that's about 100 years, 1874 to 1970, that I would find enough to kind of populate a PhD thesis. And the more I engaged in it, the more I found material. And the more I found this material, the more I realized, oh my goodness, you know, this colonized relationship and culture in the first few years of British rule was incredibly complex and diverse and dynamic. And I found that, you know, 100 years was too much to look at. That even, so I decided, okay, I'll just do the first 40 years. And I got stuck into it. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that even those 40 years, I thought to myself, well, I'm just, you know, touching the tip of the iceberg. And I still believe that, you know, so I spent 3 years researching Tauke resistance, and what I found at the end was how much I still don't know, you know, which is what's under the tip of the iceberg, this massive amount of material that lies there. And so I thought to myself, oh, it's very humbling. It's very humbling to be a historian. This is so much going on, and you can only capture a very small part of it.
Wow.
So that's a little bit of background on the PhD.
And was it easy for you, Dr. Robert, to find a supervisor, or was there someone like to have a supervisory committee because your topic is very interesting? What did you do to actually find the right university, first one, you know, to help you develop this topic further? And was it easy for you to identify your supervisory team to help you?
Right. Ooh, it's a good question. I haven't thought too much about that one, but one of the things that I wanted, because my first job was to pack books. I was packing books for one of the publisher here at USP. And one of the books that drew my attention was a book by Peter Hempenstall about protest and dissent in the Pacific. And he had written about a number of interesting protest movements in the Pacific at the turn of the 20th century. And I thought to myself, I would really like to meet this person and possibly to work with him. And the moment came, it was by accident. We were involved in a three-way project with the University of Hawaii and the University of Canterbury and USP, trying to get our students to work together on courses that had similar content using the internet as a platform for interaction. And I met him and he said to me, oh, you know, what are you doing? And I said, oh, look, you know, I'm thinking of doing a PhD. I'm reaching that point when I need to challenge myself with, you know, some intellectual project of sorts. And he said, oh, you know, we've got PhD scholarships here at the University of Canterbury. And I thought, oh, wow. And we don't have enough people coming, you know, to take them up. So I applied and I was very fortunate to get it. So he was one of the supervisors. Yes. And the other one was Ian Campbell, who had written on Fiji and Tonga and the Pacific region as a whole. So the two of them got me onto a very, very strict regime of reading. Wow. And I discovered, you know, a whole lot of new dimensions to Fiji history that I was like, wow, this is amazing. What a world. What a world.
Wow. So I'm really glad that you were stubborn, you know, that you were mentioned, you know, to the one before that says, you know, there's no resistance, you know, in Fiji, and lo and behold. And so what guided you to carry on this particular topic on, you know, looking at the COLO-WAR and the COLO East and the COLO North and all the information, amazing rich information that you haven't, you know, captured into your PhD thesis? What made you just zone in into those regions of Italy?
Okay, well, for me, it's it goes back to my upbringing, the family, my parents, their activism, their concern for the people who are marginalized by powerful forces in society. And so I wanted to identify and to read about and to try to listen to the voices of people that the history books did not necessarily give a voice to. And that's a really difficult exercise because, you know, the marginalized have very limited spaces where they can express themselves, but they do leave behind traces of their passage through time and through space. And for me, it was about using a method that we call reading against the grain. So trying to identify in the dominant narratives little, you know, like pebbles in the shoe of the dominant narrative. What's the thing that's making the dominant narrative feel a bit of discomfort? And then try to name it. And so I found lots of pebbles. And sometimes it was through conversation. Sometimes it was a sentence that was left behind by, you know, a core textbook. Sometimes it was something that I discovered in that gold mine, which the National Archives in Fiji is, you know. And then so it's a bit like being a detective. You start with little, but then it grows, it keeps growing, and then you know, you find the connections between different bits of information, and before long you've got a whole world that's unfolding in front of you. And for me, what a big part of it was connecting with the people that I was reading about in the National Archives. And just going back to them and then realizing, okay, there's so much more to this story than the little bit that I found in the archives, or that you know, the historians have written about. Yeah, so it was about using different sources from different places and trying to pull things together in a way that made sense, that gave credit to the sources, the archival sources, but also to the people that were enriching that narrative with their own stories.
Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, and I remembered, I think the last time I recall when I was in Wellington, you came over and presented, I think, part of your research at the Victoria University of Wellington, if I remember. I was just going back in time, and that's when it piqued my curiosity, when the topic of resistance, started coming through. Just by listening to you, because for most of us who grew up in Fiji, this was never included in our, social studies curriculum. Yeah, we only hear sort of like a one-sided type of history, or the history that people want us to learn when we were little. Now, with your research about, you know, the Volo East, Volo North, and Volo West, would you like to kind of share
Sure. Sure.
that aspect of
Right.
some findings, any highlights or anything you want to share with us?
Yeah. For me, the origins of the division between Volo East and Volo West, because Volo North came later, is the Volo War of 1876. Yeah. And to understand the Volo War of 1876, you have to kind of go back quite a bit and look at what was going on between the coastal areas and chiefdoms of Veitalanoa, led by Mbau and Nakumbau and his son, and the relationship between these coastal chiefdoms and the people of the interior. Yeah. And one of the things that comes up immediately is that Vakumbau, in his claims to be the Tuiviti, I think he angered a lot of people in the interior because he had never actually conquered them. And possibly because, you know, they were proprietors of very, very, well, by Fiji standards, very large tracts of land in comparison, say, to Mbau, which is a relatively small place. And so for the people of Volo, they did not have any kind of real reason to come to the Kumbau and say, okay, look, we recognize your power over us and over our resources, our land, etc., and we agree to follow your leadership. There was no such reason in Volo, and so there was always going to be some antagonism because Vakumbau and his son and the rest of the Mbauan army and their allies were quite keen to bring the whole of Fiji under Mbauan rule. And in 1865, it's quite an interesting little story. It's a very little story in a much larger story. The British consul in Fiji, by the name of Mr. Jones, went through the whole of the island of Vakalevu and stopped in the village of Nambutautau. That's in Navatusila, in Navasa. If you put your finger in the middle of the Vakalevu, you are basically putting your finger on Nambutautau. He came through there. He was very cordially welcomed by the chief and the people of Nambutautau and Navatusila. They had good conversation. And then Consul Jones and his delegation were escorted but by the chief, Katakata Imoso, and he took them back to fairly close to the Tavua coast. But as they grew closer to the coast, they saw that a number of villages in the interior of Tavua were burning. And the military force that had burnt these villages was led by Ratu Epelinaila Tikau from Ratu Takumbau's son. And so he turned around with his men, and they rushed back to Nambutautau to fortify the village and to let other Vanua in the region know that they ought to protect themselves from what they must have regarded as an invasion. Yeah. So so this is 2 years later, in July 1867. Thomas Baker was murdered in that village, that same village. Yeah. Now, so it's a fallacy to think that Thomas Baker was killed because the people of Volo were, lacked civilization, or that they were wild people. Because 2 years before, they were very forthcoming to this outside delegation. Yeah, maybe they were armed, and so it was not in the interests of the Nambutau people to engage in warfare there. But when you read the documents, there doesn't seem to be any anti-European sentiment in that area at that time. But when Thomas Baker went in, he went in as a Wesleyan delegation with I think 7, 8, or 9 vulis. People who were learning to become teachers in the Methodist Church, and because by then the Wesleyan Church had been identified as part of Mbau, as part of Mbau, and as part of the same kind of force in Fijian politics. He was advised not to travel to Nambutautau because of the developing antagonism between the people of Volo and Mbau. Yeah. And so he was advised all along the way, you should not go to Nambutautau. But being stubborn himself, he decided that he would go. So he endangered his own life and that of his vulis by going there. And when he got there, he was clubbed. And I mean, the rest, as they say, is kind of history. But the people of Volo have always kind of carried this stigma, this burden, but seldom has the political context been given as to why Reverend Baker was killed the way he was killed. Yeah, so that's an important part of it prefaces the Volo War, because after that a punitive expedition was organized and launched by Vakambau to try and defeat the people of Navatusila, but they failed. They failed really badly. The Mbauan army was badly defeated in that, and so with it was so Vakambau's prestige as the Tuiviti and his position also suffered a great deal, because he could no longer claim, as he had done until then, that he was Tuiviti. So he was really upset by that. But that defeat also kind of enabled the other tribes in Volo to kind of say, oh yeah, this government and this Mbauan power and its Wesleyan allies are not as strong as we think they are. So so they were they kind of drew some courage from that to continue with their kind of opposition and their resistance to any Mbawan attempts to consolidate Fiji into one country, under Bawan rule. And so several things happen. It's a really complex set of events, but at session, the people of Volo were not involved in any of the conversations about ceding Fiji to Great Britain. And so their views, their way of life, their chiefs, their resources, etc., their lands were not they were not privy to any of the agreements that were being reached between the British representatives and the mainly coastal chiefs of Fiji. And so at session, nobody from Volo was represented. Their representative was a man by the name of Walter Carew, who was friendly with several of the chiefs of Volo, but who could not claim to be their representative, and neither would the people of Volo said, "Oh yeah, no, we recognize him as our, paramount chief. He can come and, he can side on our behalf." No, I don't think that would have ever been conceived by any of them. So at session, the people of Volo had great cause to be upset about what had just happened. And sensing that state of unrest in Volo, the colonial administration decided that they would convene a meeting and invite the chiefs of Volo to explain to them what was the idea behind the colonial takeover, and what was the vision, and what they could guarantee for the people of Volo going forward. And that meeting took place early in January 1875, so about 3 months after session, and took place in Mavuso, in Naita City. And when the chiefs got there, there was the British had a warship there as well to kind of show them, if you don't agree, we've got the means to actually enforce our new law and order, with military might. They were just present there. They didn't articulate that way, but the message was, we're here to stay, and you need to listen to what we are proposing. We're not really here to negotiate. And so, as one of the things, so there were these deliberations, and I think the chiefs of Volo generally went back feeling, okay, this colonial administration is going to take things one step at a time. They'll probably allow us to keep our way of life, most of our land, etc., and we should be okay. But one of the things that happened during that meeting in Mavuso is that people who had come back from Australia infected with the measles virus had come to Mavuso, and the measles epidemic started for the people of Volo, started from them meeting. The chiefs and their delegations took back measles all over Volo. And it caused widespread death in Volo, including it decimated the Volo leadership. One of the consequences of that was that it greatly angered the people. And though the chiefs who had not come, they saw it as a conspiracy to weaken them. Immediately after that, there were a series of meetings up and down Volo, basically from a place near Galia Latina, Nadawanisa, those places up Niamba, all the way down to Nangalimare, which is close to Singatoka. So up and down the Singatoka Valley. you know, lots of meetings where, you know, all these different Vanua were represented just to discuss, you know, how we're going to respond to all this. And there were basically two different positions. One was that, you know, we should go to war. And the other one was, okay, let's just wait and see. And see what happens. Let's see if we can really trust this new colonial order. Yeah. Basically, things really went pear-shaped when early in 1876, I don't know why, but Gordon decided to send a military detachment to Nassau-Doko in the interior of Namosa. And as soon as this colonial military or paramilitary force arrived, the 150 villages that were all around it just all of a sudden became fearful, and their resentment actually you know, grew exponentially. And all of a sudden, the people who were advocating war, their hand was really strengthened by the presence of this military force, and those who had advocated a more moderate approach, their hand was greatly weakened. And so gradually tensions just kept rising until a moment when it boiled over, and war was declared. It's a war that lasted about 5 months, between April and August 1876. And one of the outcomes of the war was well, the outcome was the defeat of the Volo forces, and the breaking of Volo into East and West. Sorry, it's taken me so long to come to an answer to your question.
That's okay. This is wonderful. I've been getting amazing responses. People are enjoying listening to you. So carry on.
Okay, thank you. So Volo East, basically from Wainimala down to Naitasiri, these people were loosely aligned to or allied to the other Volo Vanua, who were actively involved in the conflict. By the way, Nambu Tautau was recognized as one of the kind of like the epicenter or the spiritual center of the energy behind the rebels, the Volo force. But yeah, if you just cross over into Wainimala and Naitasiri from Tautau, those people, even in Nandrao, they were looking with interest at which way this conflict was heading. So they allowed a lot of rebels from, you know, there were very few battles. Most of it was guerrilla warfare. But those who were fleeing the colonial force went to their kind of relatives and friends who lived in Volo East and kind of sought refuge there. But as far as the colonial administration was concerned, they felt that Volo East had remained loyal. Yeah. So they put a colonial administrator there, a British one, Joski, to kind of run Volo East from Wurindawa. And then in Volo West, they put Walter Carew in charge of Volo West at Natuatuadoku, which was known as Fort Carnarvon back then. Yeah. So that division dates back to that conflict, the war between the people of Volo and the new colonial force. There's a lot more detail that I haven't been able to mention that feeds into that story, and I'm really sorry I don't have time to go into that. But
that's just awesome. Just kind of just it's a wonderful taster for a lot of our listeners to get into your book, and read more, and also for them to do their own research. That's what we've been encouraging on this platform. We will give you only a little this much na valilai, and then you can carry on the rest. And it's been so wonderful. So what you've been sharing is just, adds into what a lot of appreciation coming through, because some of our history and knowledge, it's kind of like bits and pieces. So because you did a very thorough research, you're able to, identify key, filling in the gap, so to speak, for a lot of the knowledge that most of us have.
I was going to quickly say, there's still a lot of gaps. So it's good, that needs to happen. Like I was saying earlier, after 3 years of real in-depth research, I know I can see all the gaps that are still there, and that so there's still plenty to write about. And I'm so glad that there's so many people who are interested in that history, and it's wonderful. But I don't know how much more time we have here, but if you want me to go into the Dolo North one, I can briefly touch on it, but
yes, if you can. Because I know a lot of the people are waiting, but I also want to say, because this is the month for Ra, so my my Ra friends are saying, Taris, you better keep to your promise.
Yeah, so the reason why I suggest Volo North is because that really takes us into Ra.
Wow.
Yeah, and this amazing story of Moses Ndukumoy, and whose kind of name became Navasavakandua, and the importance of the village of Raunivi, and of the whole vanua of Vatukaloko in Ra. And the creation of Volo North comes as a direct consequence of how this movement that Navasavakandua led in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, it's a direct consequence of the development of that movement and its influence, basically from the Ra coast all the way into Nabutautau, Vunindawa, Muaira, and so many other vanua in between. So this man was an extremely charismatic person, leader of the priestly class, and of course those who know Fiji well know that Nakauvanra is the backdrop for the area where Vatukaloko is located, and Nakauvanra is a very significant location in terms of Fijian conceptions of who they are, and their spiritual connection with the land. And the Vatukaloko saw themselves as the guardians of Nakauvanra and its surrounding and its sacred significance. And here I'm just going to signal the wonderful work of Martha Kaplan, on that area, that very interesting history. And the work on Navasavakandua and the Tuka movement, much of it was already done by Martha Kaplan, and I kind of built on it as a historian. She's an anthropologist, and her work on that is really very impressive. But I did some archival, some detective work in the archives, and found things relating to Navasavakandua that just add a few dimensions that I got really excited about. But again, I don't know if we have time to talk about them. But basically, this movement was led by a priest and the priestly class from Rani Ivi. It was, if you take the same factors that led to the war in Volo, you find them again in this one. Discontent with the way in which Mbawan governors and kind of administration was extended over Ra and Rakiraki and the chiefs of those places. The way in which these Mbawan governors used their power to conscript laborers, young men from Ra and from Rakiraki, and kind of sold them, or kind of almost sold it. No, selling would imply property, but recruited them for work on plantations, on European plantations. And so a lot of young Ra men experienced European society, the European economy as laborers, and they suffered a great deal as a consequence. It was a violent setting. It was extremely labor intensive. It was they had very little food to eat. The places in which they lived were very, very basic, and there was nothing much to look forward to except the curiosity of engaging with people of other parts of the country who were also working on these plantations, and people from Vanuatu and from Solomon Islands would come also to work on these in these places. So, but generally speaking, it was not a very positive experience. And Navasavakandua was one of those laborers who experienced life as a laborer in Valevu, in Vuna, in Taviunira Congo. Yeah. So I don't know to what extent his experience of plantation life in Valevu actually influenced him and his vision of what Fiji needed to be like, the transformation that needed to take place. But certainly when he came back, he began organizing people around Roni Ivi. There's a very important battle of Makorowaiwai that I haven't touched on, but that I can't because there's not enough time. But he kind of brought together a lot of the individuals who felt that who felt resentful and even hostile towards what they had experienced with the new, with Mbawan rule and the new colonial order. And of course, being from the priestly clan, he was also very upset about the way that the Wesleyans had come over, had taken over, had conducted conversions, and were dismissing his clan and other similar clans around Fiji, and in fact, in 1865, I think it was one particularly zealous Wesleyan Tauke teacher had gone to Nakauvanra and actually desecrated a very sacred site there. So there was a lot. What I'm saying is there was a lot to be resentful about for him, for his class, and for the people of Watukaloko, the guardians of Nakauvanra. So he organized a movement with some of the chiefs of Rakiraki, and very quickly the colonial administration became aware that he was influential, he would need to be taken out. So he was deported first to Lakemba, where I think he was there for a year or so, something like that. And then he was allowed back. As soon as he got back, he had used Lakemba to kind of refine his doctrine. And he came back and he started in a very secretive way, but very effective way to spread the doctrine of the Tuka. And the Tuka movement became a kind of a movement that stood for an inversion of the current of the world as they saw it, turning it upside down. So he began to say that, look, a world was coming near where the foreigners, both Wesleyan and Bowen, would be driven out of Ra and Rakiraki. The land would be restored, restituted. We're talking about Yangara as well, which is another whole different story to talk about, which I haven't had a chance to talk. There's so much going on there. Yeah. So he advocated that, and he had a following right through from the Ra coast into Vitilevu, encompassing Saivo, Nalawa in the Ra areas, all the way down to Moira. I think he even had supporters close to, on the doorsteps here in Rawa, Suva. I think there were people, quietly perhaps not actively following him, but kind of very sympathetic to what he was doing. So he was arrested again, and this time he was deported to Rotuma. The colonial administration had to legislate a new regulation a new ordinance to deport him. So he was deported in 1897. Simply because the colonial administration did not trust that if he was left back into society, that he wouldn't start again, or that they just felt he was just too dangerous to allow back in what we might call civil society. So he spent a whole year in prison, and there's documentation I talk about in the book of the conditions of his imprisonment. He could read, so he was caught once with one of the earliest newspaper that Fiji had before Fiji Times. It was called actually, I'm not sure. I'll have to check my sources. But it was called the Planters Journal, the Fiji Planters Journal. He was caught in his cell with a copy of that newspaper, and so he was flogged because of that, and flogged again and put in solitary confinement because he had dared to speak to someone when he was not allowed to speak to anyone. Such was the fear of the colonial administration. So anyway, he was taken out to Rotuma, and the period of his confinement there was 10 years, and he died about 4 months before his term was due to expire. So he and the same ordinance was used to deport Apolosi Nawai. What that would have been 1917. So there was exactly 30 years later. 30 years later, that same ordinance was used to deport Apolosi Nawai. That's another whole story there. But the last thing I was going to say is that Tuka didn't die when Nabusawa Kandua was deported. It actually lived on, particularly in areas close to Nasongo, which is right next to the Mount Victoria or Tomani-Ivi.
Yeah.
And other surrounding areas. But the colonial administration all along thought that Rauni-Ivi was a bit like Nambu Tau, the really rebellious village that was kind of the spiritual force behind the resistance. And so in 1891, it was decided that the whole village of Rauni-Ivi would be deported. And so they... The whole of Rauni-Ivi was exiled to a place near my wife's village in Narewa, Kandavu, and they were there. They were there, and it was hoped that they would settle in Kandavu and forsake their village in Ra. But no, they as soon as the opportunity came after I think 10 years of exile. They requested to be taken back to their homeland. They were first resettled in a place close to where the Rokotuira was based. By then it was Rotichone Mandraiwiwi. So he kept an eye on them for a while, and then they went back to, finally they were allowed to go back to Rauni-Ivi. And interestingly, Tuka probably continued in very secretive forms, but the Vitikambani became very popular in Ra, and Rauni-Ivi became sort of the Ra headquarters for the Vitikambani. So there you go, a little bit about Ra.
Yes, man, it is so beautiful. So much, details and depth, and it's just so interesting, and so refreshing, I think, for many of us. As I was saying before, part of this history, was not taught in school, and some of us, who have privilege to go to the archives or, read other books, including your amazing research as well, has allowed us to, shed some light on those things. And it's so wonderful that I'm just looking at all the comments coming in. There's a lot of individuals who are connected to Rauni-Ivi that are, just acknowledging what you're sharing today. We also have some those from Rotuma also connecting in from today, Ravai Fatiaki, and also a few from Kandavu. So it's really awesome to see these connections, and through your work, Dr. Robert Nicole, you're able to just add those amazing information for us to just appreciate. As you and I know, and most of us listeners know, we cannot change what's already been done, right? But it's how we can learn from the past and apply it today and see how we can perhaps look at the future of Fiji, to be a better one for our children and our grandchildren. So to conclude our talanoa today, is there anything or any advice you would like to give for maybe those who are wanting to do further research to postgraduate studies, or wanting to go to university to do research into these types of history that you are doing? and also in my field of anthropology. Anything, words of advice or wisdom that you'd like to share, Vinaka?
Oh, well, you know, history for me is just like you said, now just building on your last few comments. I think history is it's a very important part of building a nation, and if building a united and unified nation is indeed a good thing, then I think more of our young people, but also our influencers, that means older people, need to read and to, because I think one of the main problems with that we've had here in Fiji is that we tend to rely on stereotypes about other people. And stereotypes arise a lot out of ignorance of other people. And the more you read, the more you come to understand others. You also come to understand yourself in relation to others. And there's something profoundly healing about that. And I think our nation needs to heal, not necessarily just between you know, the different ethnic groups, but within also ethnic groups and within communities. And I think there's a lot of that going on, but in any way, there are some fantastic people who are healers in a broad sense, who do healing in a very varied, in a really great variety of ways. But as a historian, history is a good way to do it. And it's, I think for young people, many of them just grow up with stereotypes, some of them that we teach them ourselves. And it's a shame that at school, a lot of parents are channeling their children who have aptitude for reading and for writing into disciplines like commerce or science. And I have nothing against those. They're really important. But we also need really gifted students to be channeled in history and other social sciences, like you mentioned, archaeology, because they can render a very good service to our society in that way, in a way that maybe, you know, people in the private sector or in economics or science or construction, etc., can't. So I would encourage people who are interested in history to go ahead. You are doing a very important service to yourself, to your family, to your communities, to your province, your vanua, but also to our to this country. That would be just a small thing to humble contribution.
Vinaka vakalevu Sara, Dr. Robert Nicole, from all of us, you know, listening in today. We just want to say Vinaka vakalevu to you for spending some time with us. We know that you have got a huge workload with your own teaching at the University of the South Pacific, but your time to Talanoa with us is healing. Healing in that way. I think it's a really good word. I think we can pull out from tonight's discussion that a lot of questions, you know, are there amongst our itoke, you know, in Nanrangana Vosa, in Ba, in Yasawa, you know, even in the Son of Ra that we are actually talking about the whole of this month. But what you have made tonight is you've opened that door of opportunity for, a lot of our parents who are guiding their children in terms of pathways, career pathways, as well as those adults as well, parents who are listening tonight, to encourage them, to go to archives and libraries and museums and do their own research. Because the reading, as you said, that's been like our advice every week we do our session, encouraging our people. Wili vola vakalevu, na levu ngani wili vola na kena Vinaka. Read, read, read. As you, both of you and I know, and the others know, information and knowledge is power. Once we have a powerful group of people and they know themselves and their identity, we have a strong community, a strong Yasana, and a strong Vanua. And yeah, that is just so wonderful. Dr. Robert, for our Talanoa tonight. Woo! And I have to say, you will have to come back and finish your Talanoa. I can see lots of thumbs up coming. But when you are free, I will go through your calendar, and whenever you have like a half an hour or 20 minutes, you're most welcome to join us.
Vinaka, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for the honor.
Vinaka vakalevu Sara, you enjoy your beautiful Sunday evening in Naudala. And we send our wakamoade from Hawaii. And all of us who are listening in from the United States, from England, there's a few from Australia, New Zealand, and even in Fiji. There's a lot saying hello here from Nandi and from the Northern Division. So, and also Tunitasir, there's a family here drinking grog, Kuwati Kambu Kambu, and they just drinking grog and watching our Talanoa. So, yeah, Vinaka vakalevu San. So we bid you goodbye and we will see you again. Vinaka vakalevu, Naka.